A skull can rewrite the story of humanity. Deep in the Peruvian desert rests a collection of ancient remains known as the Paracas Skulls, and their bizarre, elongated form defies every simple explanation. For decades, these relics have ignited a fierce debate between science and speculation, centered on one shocking question: could their unique shape be written in their very genes? By the end of this exploration, you will understand the full scope of this genetic mystery, from controversial lab results to the profound implications for our shared past. We will examine claims of unknown DNA and confront whether these individuals were part of a forgotten chapter in human history. What does it mean to be human when the past holds such silent, bony puzzles? The year was 1928, and the air on that peninsula would have tasted of salt and dust. Peruvian archaeologist Julio Tello, working across this stark terrain, unearthed something that transformed a quiet stretch of desert into one of archaeology's most profound sights. He found not a simple grave but an entire necropolis, a silent city meticulously constructed for the departed. The scale was immense, with hundreds of individuals carefully prepared for their journey. They were wrapped into large, conical bundles, often seated as if in contemplation, and placed together within shared tombs built from stone and earth. This was not a place of haste or fear, but one of profound ritual and respect. The care evident in these practices spoke of a sophisticated culture, one with deep beliefs about life, death, and what lies beyond. They left behind vibrant textiles, intricate pottery, and a clear message that they honored their ancestors with great ceremony. Yet, amidst this cultural richness, a physical anomaly quietly demanded attention. When researchers examined the remains within those sacred bundles, they encountered a feature so consistent and so deliberate that it could not be ignored. The skulls of these individuals were dramatically, intentionally elongated, reshaping not just bone, but the very questions we would ask about them for the next 100 years. The sheer scale of these skulls is the first clue that something extraordinary was at work. When researchers carefully measured the internal space, the numbers told a startling story. A typical adult human skull holds between 1,200 and 1,450 cubic centimeters. That is the container for our thoughts, our memories, our very consciousness. Yet some of the Paracas skulls shattered that norm, boasting capacities soaring to 1,800 cubic centimeters or even more. To visualize that difference, think of the space inside a standard basketball compared to a significantly larger one. It is not a subtle tweak but a fundamental redesign. In biology, such a dramatic expansion of the brain case is not merely cosmetic. It implies a corresponding increase in brain tissue itself. This presents a monumental anatomical puzzle. Could an entire community have naturally developed skulls and brains so substantially larger than the human average? The implications are staggering, pointing toward a potential neurological difference that rewrites our understanding of human development in this region. This undeniable physical evidence pushes past simple curiosity and demands a scientific explanation, which traditionally points toward a widespread cultural practice. This widespread practice provides a logical and well-documented answer. Across continents and cultures, from the distant past to more recent history, communities have shaped the heads of their youngest members. The process, known as intentional cranial deformation, is remarkably straightforward in principle. An infant's skull is not a single, solid bone, but a collection of plates connected by soft, flexible seams. By applying gentle, sustained pressure with padded boards or tight cloth bindings, these plates can be guided to grow in a specific direction over months and years. The result is a permanently altered head shape, a living symbol molded from childhood. For the Maya, a sloping forehead was a mark of nobility. In parts of ancient Mesopotamia, it signified beauty. Among certain Native American tribes and later Andean cultures like the Colagua, it reinforced a powerful group identity. This explanation is comfortable and complete. It neatly places the Paracas skulls within a global tapestry of human cultural expression, suggesting their elongation was a choice, a tradition, a badge of belonging. It tells us they valued a distinct appearance so deeply they were willing to shape their children to achieve it. This framework solves the mystery with sociology, not speculation. Yet, when you look closer at the Paracas bones themselves, this tidy answer begins to fray at the edges. If the shape was purely the result of external pressure, the bone should tell a very specific story, one that some researchers argue is missing from these particular remains. But the bone itself holds a second, more profound secret. Look past the dramatic elongation and examine the very architecture of these skulls. In any typical human head, the top and sides are constructed from two separate, curved plates of bone called the parietals. They meet along a distinct, zigzagging seam that runs from the front to the back, a joint known as the sagittal suture. This seam is crucial. It allows for the incredible expansion of an infant's brain as it grows. In every documented case of intentional head shaping, from ancient Maya nobility to more recent traditions, that seam remains. It might be stretched or distorted by the pressure, but it is always visibly there, a permanent record of the skull's natural design. With the Paracas skulls, however, that record is often erased. In a significant number of these remains, researchers find no trace of the sagittal suture at all. Instead of two plates meeting at a seam, the entire top of the skull appears to be a single, seamless, solid piece of bone. This is not a subtle detail, it is a fundamental biological divergence. Think of it like pottery. Cultural head binding is like molding soft clay into a new shape. The material's original seams are still present within the finished form. What we see in Paracas is different. It is as if the vessel was fired from a single, unbroken piece of material to begin with. From a strict biological standpoint, this seamless plate cannot be created by wrapping a baby's head. External pressure cannot fuse separate bones into one, it can only guide their growth. This specific condition has a medical name, craniosynostosis, the premature fusing of the skull's sutures. When it occurs naturally, it is a genetic trait, something written into the blueprint of an individual from conception. Its widespread presence in a burial population suggests something even more significant, an inherited characteristic. This single anatomical feature shifts the entire mystery. It moves the conversation from what was done to these people to who they inherently were. It suggests that the distinctive Paracas form was not merely a cultural mask worn on the body, but potentially the body itself. This brings us to a third, and perhaps most foundational, clue hidden at the very base of the skull. Every human head rests upon a single, critical opening called the Foramen Magnum. This is the grand passageway, the literal hole in the bone where the spinal cord exits to connect with the brainstem. Its placement is not arbitrary. It is a perfect evolutionary signature of how a creature moves through the world. In four-legged animals like dogs or horses, this opening is positioned toward the rear of the skull, allowing the head to project forward from a horizontal spine. For modern humans who walk fully upright, the foramen magnum sits almost perfectly centered underneath the skull's weight. This central location is our anatomical anchor. It allows our head to balance directly atop our vertical spine like a ball on a stick, enabling our smooth, efficient, two-legged gait. It is one of the clearest physical markers of being human. Now, look at some of the Paracas specimens. Preliminary examinations by a number of researchers have noted something unusual. On these elongated skulls, the foramen magnum does not appear to be in that classic centered human position. Instead, it seems shifted, located further forward on the skull's base. This is not a subtle difference in measurement. It implies a completely different mechanical relationship between the head and the neck. If this observation holds true, it would suggest these individuals carried their heads differently. Their posture, the very way they balanced and moved, might have had a unique character. The profound implication here is that this feature cannot be created by any form of cranial binding. You cannot wrap an infant's head to move the location of this fundamental hole in its base. This is about the deep, structural blueprint of the skeleton itself. So we now have three interconnected puzzles: a larger cranial volume, a missing bone seam, and a potentially shifted spinal anchor. Each one on its own could be an anomaly. But together, they form a pattern that challenges the simplest explanation and points toward a far more complex origin story for the people of Paracas. The mounting physical evidence pointed toward a blueprint written not in culture but in code. To solve a biological puzzle, you must examine biology at its most fundamental level. This is where the story of the Paracas skulls took its most controversial turn, moving from the quiet halls of museums into the high-stakes world of modern genetics. In the 2010s, small samples were carefully taken from several of these enigmatic remains. The material chosen was critical, not from the bone itself, which can be contaminated over centuries, but from preserved tissue like the inner pulp of teeth and strands of hair still clinging to the ancient bundles. These samples represented the last, fragile whispers of the individual's own biological identity. The initial analysis was led by researchers outside mainstream academic institutions, including author and researcher Brian Forrester, and later involved a professional geneticist who chose to remain anonymous. Their reported findings, when they began to circulate, did not just challenge the narrative, they seemed to shatter it. The claims focused on mitochondrial DNA, the genetic material passed down exclusively from mother to child through countless generations. According to these preliminary reports, the sequences extracted showed mutations that were entirely unfamiliar. They did not match any known human lineage, not Homo sapiens, not Neanderthal, not even the elusive Denisovans. More startlingly, the reports suggested the markers were so distinct they could not be placed within any known primate or animal database on Earth. The implication, as presented in documentaries and public lectures, was staggering. It proposed that the Paracas individuals might represent what was described as a new human-like creature, a branch on the evolutionary tree so distant it had remained completely unknown to science. This was the moment the mystery exploded beyond archaeology, suggesting we might be sharing our planet's history with a forgotten relation whose very bones we were only just beginning to understand. Yet, in science, extraordinary claims require an extraordinary standard of proof, and this is where the path grows complex. These groundbreaking findings have never been published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal, the essential crucible where any new discovery is tested, challenged, and validated by the broader community. The heart of modern science beats not with a single discovery, but through a process of collective verification. This is where the genetic claims about the Paracas skulls encounter their most significant challenge. In the established world of academic research, credibility is not simply declared, it is built brick by brick through a rigorous system known as peer review. Imagine a scientist completes a groundbreaking study. They do not immediately announce it to the world. Instead, they submit their full work to a specialized journal. The editors then send that manuscript, stripped of the author's names, to several other experts in that exact field. These peers are the ultimate fact-checkers. They scrutinize every detail, the methodology, the control samples, the raw data, the statistical analysis, and the logic of the conclusions. They ask hard questions. Is the testing protocol sound? Could contamination explain these results? Are there other, more mundane interpretations of the data? Only after this gauntlet, and often after multiple rounds of revisions, is the work deemed solid enough for publication. This process is slow, it is demanding, and it is designed specifically to catch errors and uphold standards. It is how science self-corrects. The sensational claims of unknown DNA from Paracas exist outside this system. They have not been published in a peer-reviewed journal. This means the full evidence, the very data that would allow another geneticist in a lab across the world to run the same tests and see if they get the same results, remains unseen by the scientific community. The researchers involved have spoken of their reasons, including a fear of professional backlash for challenging established narratives, and the desire to protect the anonymity of the geneticist who performed the work. These are understandable human concerns in a field where reputation is currency. Yet the consequence is a profound credibility gap. Without that open, verifiable data trail, these extraordinary assertions remain in a kind of academic limbo, fascinating hypotheses awaiting the essential and openly available evidence required to transform them into accepted fact. This leaves us at a crossroads, forced to weigh a captivating story against the gold standard of scientific proof. Even the most fascinating genetic claim must first survive a gauntlet of invisible threats. The journey of a DNA sample from a 2,000-year-old skull to a modern laboratory is a race against time and contamination. Genetic material does not last forever. It breaks down, shattering into smaller and smaller fragments over the centuries. While the dry desert air of Paracas helped preserve the bones themselves, it is not the perfect genetic vault that permafrost provides. In frozen environments, ancient DNA can remain remarkably intact for tens of thousands of years. On the sun-baked Peruvian coast, the clock on genetic preservation ticks much faster, leaving scientists with only the most degraded, fragile pieces of a biological puzzle to work with. This degradation alone makes the task immensely difficult, but it is compounded by a far more insidious problem: the overwhelming presence of the modern world. The true enemy of ancient DNA research is not time, but us. From the moment an archaeologist's brush first touches a skull, to its placement in a museum case, to its handling in a lab, it is bombarded with modern genetic material. A single skin cell flaking from a researcher's hand, a breath exhaled near an open sample, even a speck of dust carrying genetic traces from anywhere in the world, any of these can settle onto an ancient specimen. This modern DNA is fresh, complete, and abundant. When processed, it can easily drown out the faint, fragmented whispers of the ancient genetic code, creating a false signal that looks convincingly real. For a result to be considered definitive, the chain of custody must be impeccable. It requires samples to be collected with surgical precision in sterile conditions, processed in clean room facilities that filter the very air, and analyzed with controls that account for every possible contaminant. Most importantly, any extraordinary finding must be replicated, meaning separate samples from the same skull would need to be tested independently in different laboratories, all arriving at the same unprecedented result. Until such a rigorous, transparent process is undertaken and shared with the global scientific community, the genetic mystery of Paracas will remain just that, a captivating enigma suspended between a tantalizing possibility and the uncompromising standards of proof. Perhaps the most eloquent testimony does not come from the bones but from the cloth. To truly listen to the Paracas, we must look at what they left behind, the vibrant, intricate textiles that have endured for over 2,000 years in the dry desert air. These are not simple fabrics, they are masterworks of art and engineering, woven with a complexity and a riot of color that still stuns historians today. The skill required speaks of a sophisticated, settled society with specialized artisans, a deep understanding of natural dyes, and a cultural language expressed in every thread. Their world was likely guided by a powerful spiritual vision, a theocratic system where priestly leaders interpreted the will of the gods and the cycles of nature. This context is the essential stage upon which the mystery of the skulls plays out. When we find these elongated individuals, they are almost always at the very heart of this cultural splendor. They were laid to rest within the most elaborate tombs, wrapped in cocoons of unimaginable wealth. Some of these mummy bundles contain over 100 yards of the finest embroidered cloth, layer upon layer of symbolic protection and status. They were accompanied by grave goods of pottery, gold ornaments, and offerings that signified immense importance. This was not a burial for an ordinary person. This was a send-off for a revered elite. So the question shifts from what they were to who they were in the eyes of their community. The evidence strongly suggests these individuals held the highest social or spiritual rank. One compelling interpretation is that they were a ruling dynasty, a family line that held power across generations. In such a case, the distinctive head shape could have served a dual purpose. It was likely a cultural mark of their nobility, achieved through the practiced head binding of their infants, a visible sign setting them apart from birth. But could it also have been, for this specific lineage, a naturally occurring genetic trait that became their defining royal characteristic? Alternatively, consider a more profound possibility. What if, in the distant past of the Paracas, a child was born with a rare genetic condition that caused a seamless, elongated skull? In a culture deeply attuned to the spiritual world, such a unique physical appearance might not have been seen as an anomaly, but as a divine sign. That individual could have been elevated as a sacred figure, a bridge between the people and the gods. Their unusual biology, perhaps passed to their descendants, would then become the literal embodiment of spiritual authority, a trait so revered it was then culturally emulated by the wider elite through binding. The artifacts whisper that these people were not outcasts, they were central. They were honored, protected, and sent into the afterlife with every conceivable honor. Their skulls, therefore, are not merely biological curiosities. They are the physical anchors of a lost worldview, silent stone vessels that once held the minds of kings, priests, or perhaps beings considered something more. The story of elongated skulls is a global tapestry woven across continents and millennia. From the artistic depictions of the Mangbetu people in Central Africa to the imposing stone heads of the Olmec in ancient Mexico, and even in the frozen resting place of the Malta boy in Siberia, communities have independently arrived at the same profound idea: to reshape the human head. This was not a singular cultural quirk but a recurring theme in the human story, a powerful testament to a shared impulse, the desire to physically manifest identity, status, or spiritual belief upon the very bodies of the next generation. The methods were remarkably similar, using bindings and boards on the pliable skulls of infants, proving that the knowledge of cranial deformation was a kind of ancient, widespread technology. This global context is crucial, for it firmly establishes that the basic shape of the Paracas skulls can, and should, first be understood as part of this universal human behavior. It grounds the mystery in a recognizable pattern of cultural expression. Yet, when you place a Paracas skull side by side with an elongated skull from another culture, the differences begin to whisper a more complex tale. Look at the overall form. Many culturally modified skulls achieve their elongation through a distinct, almost angled slope from the forehead back. The Paracas specimens, however, often present a more dramatic, sweeping curve that continues in a near-perfect arc from the brow to the back of the head, a shape some researchers describe as more fluid, more organic. Then consider the weight and substance. The bone of many Paracas skulls is noted for its remarkable density and thickness, a physical robustness that feels substantial, even heavy, compared to the often thinner bone of other modified remains. But the most telling contrasts return to those core anomalies. While a typical shaped skull from ancient Egypt or medieval Europe will still clearly show the zigzag seam running along its top. Many Paracas examples present that seamless, solid bone plate. And while the cranial volume of shaped skulls usually remains within the normal human range, simply redistributed, the sheer internal capacity of the largest Paracas skulls pushes far beyond that boundary. This comparative framework is the essential tool for separating signal from noise. It allows us to see that while the Paracas people almost certainly participated in the global tradition of head shaping, they may have been working with a unique biological canvas. Imagine two artists, one starting with a standard canvas and stretching it on a frame to create an elongated painting, the other beginning with an inherently longer, specially woven canvas to achieve a similar shape. The final silhouette might look comparable from a distance, but the fundamental materials tell different stories. The widespread global practice explains the common silhouette, but it does not automatically account for the specific, extreme biological features concentrated in Paracas, the expanded volume, the fused suture, the potentially shifted foramen magnum. This is why the Peruvian desert remains the epicenter of the deepest mystery. Other sites show us a cultural choice. Paracas presents us with that choice layered upon, and perhaps inspired by, a physical reality that continues to challenge our understanding. The global context does not diminish the enigma of Paracas, it sharpens it, isolating those peculiar traits that refuse to be explained by tradition alone, and pointing insistently toward a legacy written in bone and perhaps in genes. Here, the mystery takes its boldest leap into the unknown. Could the people of Paracas have been something other than us, not just in culture, but in kind? This is the core of the alternative theory, a narrative that takes those stubborn anatomical clues and weaves them into a story of a forgotten branch on the human family tree. Proponents of this view, like the late researcher Lloyd Pye, suggest these individuals were not merely an unusual group of Homo sapiens, but the lingering descendants of a different hominin species altogether, or a very ancient, isolated lineage of our own genus that developed unique traits over thousands of generations. Imagine a small population crossing into the Americas not 13,000 years ago, but far earlier, during a much more ancient migration wave. Isolated on a continent of immense geographic diversity, they could have evolved along a subtly different path. Their distinctive cranial features, then, were not deformations but their natural state, the standard blueprint for their kind. This separate lineage hypothesis elegantly bundles all the puzzling evidence into one package. The larger cranial volume, simply the norm for their species, the missing sagittal suture, a standard feature of their skeletal design, the shifted foramen magnum, a natural adaptation of their posture and gait. In this framework, every biological oddity transforms from an anomaly into an expected characteristic, explaining everything at once with a single, sweeping idea. It is a profoundly captivating story, one that speaks to our deep fascination with lost worlds and hidden chapters in our own history. Yet, for all its narrative power, this theory stands on a foundation of profound silence. The most significant challenge is the absence of corroborating evidence from the rest of the skeleton. If these individuals were truly a different subspecies or species, their unique biology would not be confined to their skulls alone. We would expect to find consistent, telltale differences in their postcranial bones, the full framework of hips, limbs, ribs, and spines. These bones would tell us how they walked, how they worked, how their entire bodies were built. To date, no such consistent suite of non-sapien morphology has been identified and verified from Paracas remains. The few full skeletons that have been studied, while sometimes showing individual variations, do not present a unified, radically different anatomical picture. This evidentiary gap is not a minor detail, it is a chasm. A new human subspecies cannot be declared from skulls alone. It requires the full testimony of the skeleton, a testimony that has so far not come forward. We are left, then, with a choice between a breathtaking story that explains everything but lacks foundational proof, and a more conservative science that acknowledges the strange details but awaits more complete evidence. This tension is where the mystery lies, pulsating between what we can imagine and what we can truly know. The most compelling counter-narrative requires no lost species, only the complex reality of human biology. Medical science provides a powerful lens through which to view the Paracas anomalies, framing them not as signs of otherness, but as profound examples of human variation and cultural adaptation. Take the seamless bone plate, the missing sagittal suture. This condition, known as craniosynostosis, is a recognized congenital disorder where the skull's fibrous seams fuse prematurely in infancy. In its most common, mild forms, it can cause a misshapen head that might be corrected. But in rare, severe cases, multiple sutures can fuse, leading to a dramatically altered skull shape and, critically, increased intracranial pressure. This pressure can actually stimulate the bone to grow thicker and the cranial vault to expand in a compensatory effort to protect the developing brain. Here, a single medical condition could potentially explain two key Paracas features at once: the fused suture and the increased cranial volume. It is a tragic yet natural occurrence, a genetic lottery that has affected children throughout human history. Furthermore, the exceptional cranial capacity in some specimens could point toward another known disorder, hydrocephalus, sometimes called fluid on the brain. This condition involves a buildup of cerebrospinal fluid within the skull's ventricles. In a developing child, this mounting pressure can cause the skull bones, which are still soft and separated, to expand outward to accommodate the fluid, resulting in a significantly enlarged head. Without modern intervention, the outcomes for such individuals in antiquity would have been severe. Yet, the archaeological record from Paracas tells a story not of neglect but of profound reverence. This is where culture and biology intertwine in a deeply human way. Imagine a community guided by powerful spiritual beliefs, where the physical world was seen as a reflection of the divine. A child born with a strikingly unusual appearance, perhaps one whose head grew large and elongated not by binding, but by a rare biological fate, might not have been seen as ill. They could have been interpreted as touched by the gods, marked for a sacred purpose. Their very difference became a sign. In this mainstream scientific view, the Paracas elite may have practiced a form of selective care and veneration. Individuals born with these rare conditions who survived infancy and childhood might have been elevated to a special status precisely because of their unique biology. They were not hidden away, they were honored, integrated into the spiritual hierarchy, perhaps even seen as oracles or living bridges to the supernatural realm. Their eventual passing would then be a moment of immense ceremonial importance, explaining why they were laid to rest with such unparalleled wealth and care in the heart of the necropolis. This framework elegantly weaves the strange evidence into a tapestry of known medicine and plausible anthropology. It argues that what we are witnessing is not evidence of a separate branch of humanity, but a poignant intersection where human genetics, expressed through random mutation or rare disorder, collided with a specific cultural worldview that chose to interpret difference as divinity. The skulls are still extraordinary, but their story becomes one of human resilience, cultural meaning-making, and the ways communities throughout time have sought to understand the mysterious variances within their own midst. This perspective asks us to consider a powerful idea, that the truly alien sometimes resides not in distant stars, but in the rare and beautiful variations of our own species. Mythology often remembers what history forgets. When the physical evidence presents a riddle, we can sometimes find echoes of an answer preserved in the oldest human technology of all, the spoken story. Across the Andes, woven into the fabric of local oral tradition, is the powerful legend of Viracocha. This was not a minor deity, but a supreme creator god, often described as a tall, bearded figure with pale skin, who emerged from the Pacific Ocean or descended from the heavens. He was a civilizing force, a teacher who brought knowledge of agriculture, architecture, and social order before departing across the waters, promising to return. For generations, this has been a spiritual cornerstone, yet some researchers and storytellers look at the Paracas elite with their dramatic and unusual appearance and hear a faint possible echo. Could the legend be a cultural memory, a mythologized account of real individuals? The theory suggests that a physically distinct priestly class, perhaps marked by those elongated skulls and a different stature or complexion, could have been the original seed for the Viracocha stories. They would have been the knowledgeable ones, the leaders who directed the construction of canals and temples, who understood the stars and the seasons. Over centuries, their real identities could have blurred, their teachings amplified, until the memory of the teachers transformed into the myth of the god. This is not to say the Paracas people were literal deities from the stars, but that their profound impact on their society may have been preserved in the only way pre-literate cultures could preserve such things, through epic narrative. We see a similar pattern in other traditions. Certain Native American legends speak of the star people, celestial beings who came to Earth, shared wisdom, and sometimes intermarried with human tribes, leaving behind lineages marked by special knowledge or unique traits. These stories, from the Andes to the Great Plains, share a common thread. They are explanations for the extraordinary. When a community encounters individuals who are profoundly different, whether in knowledge, technology, or physical form, the human mind seeks to make sense of it. The most powerful sense-making tool we have is to place that difference within a grand, cosmic framework. A person with a larger head and deep understanding becomes a star-born teacher. A lineage with a unique trait becomes touched by the divine. It is crucial to understand that these myths are not historical documents to be taken literally. They are, however, invaluable cultural lenses. They show us how a prehistoric population might have interpreted and remembered individuals who stood apart. The stories tell us less about the actual biology of the Paracas elite and more about the immense social and spiritual role they likely played. Their difference was not merely tolerated, it was sacralized, woven into the very cosmology of their people. This mythological layer adds a profound dimension to the mystery. It suggests that whether their traits were cultural, genetic, or medical, the result was the same. They were seen as fundamentally other, and that otherness was enshrined in legend. The bones pose a biological question, but the myths answer with a human one, reminding us that our ancestors did not just see bodies, they saw meaning. And sometimes the most enduring legacy is not written in stone or bone, but in the timeless, echoing language of story. Perhaps the most definitive answers will come not from extracting DNA, but from reading the silent geometry of the bone itself. The future of this mystery is shifting toward a realm of pure, non-invasive precision, where technology allows us to see these ancient remains in a light no previous generation could imagine. The key lies in advanced medical imaging, specifically high-resolution computed tomography or CT scanning. This process is revolutionary for archaeology. It involves no cutting, no sampling, no physical disturbance. Instead, it uses a series of X-ray images taken from different angles to construct a perfect, three-dimensional digital model of a skull, down to the most minute internal detail. Think of it as creating a flawless virtual twin of the original artifact, one that can be studied, measured, and even digitally dissected an infinite number of times without ever touching the fragile physical object. This digital model unlocks everything. Researchers can take exact, unambiguous measurements of the internal cranial capacity, settling debates over volume with mathematical certainty. They can zoom into the intricate topography of the skull's interior, tracing the pathways of ancient blood vessels and the hollow spaces of sinuses, which can hold clues about physiology and even potential health. Most critically, they can examine the sutures, the seams between the bone plates, with microscopic clarity. A CT scan can definitively show whether a suture is truly fused solid into a single plate, or if it merely appears smooth on the outside while still having a complex, interlocking structure within. This technology moves us from speculation about the bone's condition to a verified, three-dimensional fact. To complement this visual precision, a powerful analytical tool called geometric morphometrics enters the picture. This is not about simple measurements of length or width. Instead, it is a sophisticated form of statistical shape analysis. Imagine placing hundreds of tiny, digital reference points across the surface of a three-dimensional skull model. The software then records the precise spatial relationship between all those points, capturing the skull's complete form as a complex cloud of data. Now, do this for many different skulls, a large sample of typical, unmodified human skulls from around the world, a collection of known culturally deformed skulls from other sites, and a set of skulls with documented medical conditions like craniosynostosis or hydrocephalus. Finally, add the Paracas skulls to this digital library. Geometric morphometrics can then perform a kind of mathematical ballet, comparing all these shapes at once. It can calculate with objective numerical rigor how similar or different the Paracas shapes are from each group. Does the average Paracas skull shape cluster mathematically with the culturally modified skulls, or does it form its own distinct statistical group, separate from all others, perhaps aligning more closely with the pathological examples? This approach strips away subjective description and replaces it with quantifiable evidence. It can tell us in the language of hard data just how unique these forms truly are. This fusion of cutting-edge scanning and objective shape analysis represents a new chapter. It builds a solid, empirical foundation, one that can either reinforce the cultural explanation by showing a clear statistical match, or amplify the biological mystery by revealing a quantifiable divergence. The silent stone vessels from the desert may soon have their most profound secrets translated not by speculation, but by the unambiguous language of numbers and light. Yet behind every measurement and every hypothesis lies a silent, profound truth. These elongated skulls are not objects, they are people. Each one represents an individual who once lived, breathed, and was deeply loved by a community that took immense care in their final journey. For the indigenous peoples of Peru, particularly those who trace their lineage to these ancient lands, the Paracas remains are not puzzles to be solved, but ancestors to be honored. This reality casts a long ethical shadow over the entire investigation, asking us a difficult but essential question: where does respectful curiosity end, and where does violation begin? The debate over studying human remains, especially those removed from their resting places decades ago, is one of the most intense in modern archaeology. Many indigenous communities and scholars argue that treating ancestral bones as scientific specimens, particularly in searches for so-called non-human origins, risks stripping these individuals of their fundamental humanity. It can feel like a new form of colonial extraction, taking not land or gold, but the very bodily legacy of a people to serve an external narrative. The language of mystery and aliens, while captivating, can inadvertently dehumanize, turning sacred ancestors into curiosities or evidence for a sensational story. The core of the issue is one of consent and connection. When cultural links to the distant past are complex or fragmented, who has the right to decide if these bones are studied, or how? The emerging ethical standard, and the only path forward that carries moral weight, is one of true collaboration. This means future research into the Paracas skulls must be guided by partnership with descendant communities. It requires scientists to step out of the lab and into a dialogue, to listen as much as they explain, and to grant these communities a decisive voice in whether testing proceeds. what questions are asked, and how any findings are shared with the world. This is not an obstacle to knowledge, but a deeper, more responsible way of seeking it. It recognizes that the most important mysteries are not just about what we can discover, but about how we choose to discover it. The story of these skulls, therefore, becomes a mirror. It reflects our own values, our respect for the past, and our willingness to let the silent ones, through their living descendants, have a say in their own narrative. To solve a historical puzzle while causing present-day harm is no solution at all. The ultimate answer may not lie in a DNA sequence, but in finding a way to honor both the quest for understanding and the sacred right of the past to rest in peace. The story is written not just in bone, but in the very strands of hair that clung to these ancient bundles. Adding another layer of intrigue are the persistent reports about the hair color found on some of the Paracas remains. Across the ancient Americas, the hair of indigenous populations is almost uniformly described as black, a trait governed by the rich pigment known as eumelanin. Yet, some of the Paracas samples, as noted by researchers and museum visitors over the years, present a startling contrast. They are described as shades of red, auburn, and even a light brown some would call blonde. This is not a detail about style, but about biology at its most fundamental. Hair color is a direct product of our genetic code, determined by the type, amount, and distribution of melanin granules within each strand. The vibrant red hue, in particular, is a genetic signature. It is primarily associated with specific variants of a gene called MC1R, which alter the body's production of melanin, favoring a reddish pigment called pheomelanin over the darker eumelanin. These gene variants are uncommon on a global scale, and according to the long-standing scientific narrative, were believed to be entirely absent in the populations of the pre-Columbian Americas. If the observations about the Paracas hair are accurate, and if future rigorous testing confirms the presence of these genetic markers, the implications ripple far beyond a single peninsula. It would suggest one of two fascinating possibilities. The first is a story of unexpected connections across vast oceans. It could point to very ancient and previously unrecognized gene flow into South America from populations carrying these traits, potentially long before any recorded transoceanic contact. The second possibility is one of remarkable local adaptation. It could indicate that a unique mutation for this trait arose independently within this isolated community, a rare genetic event that then became characteristic within this specific lineage. This detail of pigmentation ties the cranial mystery directly to one of the grandest puzzles in human history, the peopling of the New World. It asks us to reconsider the maps of ancient migration, the isolation of continents, and the incredible diversity that can emerge when human groups adapt to their world over thousands of years. A single strand of red hair, therefore, becomes more than a curiosity. It becomes a potential thread, fragile yet vivid, connecting the secluded dead of Paracas to the sprawling, interconnected story of humanity itself. The color of a single hair can unravel a continent's story. When we encounter traits that seem out of place, like red hair in ancient Peru or a skull shape that defies local norms, the human mind instinctively searches for a source. This search leads us directly into one of history's most heated intellectual arenas, the diffusionist debate. At its heart is a compelling and controversial question: did ancient civilizations across the world develop in complete isolation, or were there threads of connection, however faint, stretching across the vast oceans long before Columbus? Proponents of transoceanic contact theories look at the Paracas skulls and see not just local anomalies, but potential landmarks on a forgotten global map. They argue that the unusual biological signatures, if proven, alongside striking cultural parallels, could be fragments of a much larger story. They point to the sudden and sophisticated emergence of pyramid construction in both Egypt and Mesoamerica, to shared practices of mummification, and to eerily similar artistic symbols depicting feathered serpents or solar discs found in widely separated cultures. The idea is captivating: a single ship, blown off course or embarked on a deliberate voyage, carrying a small group of individuals from a distant shore. This group, perhaps possessing distinct physical traits, would not need to conquer a continent to leave a mark. Their arrival could introduce new ideas, new technologies, and, critically, new genetic material into the local population. If they held a position of knowledge or status, their unique appearance might be emulated and revered, their lineage preserved within a priestly caste. In this framework, the Paracas elite become not a separate evolutionary branch, but the living legacy of an ancient encounter, a biological and cultural fusion preserved in the dry sands of Peru. This theory elegantly bundles the mystery into a grand narrative of human exploration and connection, suggesting our ancestors were far more interconnected than our history books have traditionally allowed. It places the elongated skulls at the very center of a paradigm war, where they are no longer just archaeological finds, but physical evidence in a courtroom of historical speculation. Yet, for all its narrative appeal, this idea stands on the far shores of accepted scholarship. Mainstream archaeology approaches such claims with deep skepticism, demanding a standard of proof that has so far been elusive. The primary objection is not a lack of imagination, but a profound lack of conclusive, corroborating evidence. Where are the shipwrecks from these voyages in pre-Columbian waters? Where is the undeniable linguistic transfer or the clear trail of material goods, like distinctive pottery or metals, that would trace a continuous line from one hemisphere to another? The cultural parallels, while intriguing, are often explained by the concept of convergent evolution, the idea that different human societies, facing similar challenges and inspired by similar human minds, can independently arrive at similar solutions, like pyramids for reaching the heavens or mummification for honoring the dead. To build a case on cultural similarity alone is seen as building on sand. This is why the Paracas skulls carry such weight for diffusionists. They offer something beyond pottery shards or myth. They offer potential physical proof written in bone and, hypothetically, in DNA. They represent the tantalizing possibility of a body, not just an idea arriving from somewhere else. This debate is ultimately a clash of philosophies. One side champions isolation and independent genius, viewing the achievements of the Americas as a magnificent, homegrown triumph. The other hears whispers of a wider world, believing that human curiosity and the ocean's currents could have forged links in the deep past. The skulls, silent and enigmatic, are claimed by both sides. They are either the ultimate evidence for a lost chapter of global history, or they are the most extreme and misunderstood examples of a local culture's own unique path. To decide, we must look closer beyond the theories and into the very earth from which they came. The silent chemistry within bone offers a different kind of story. To move beyond speculation about origins, science has developed a remarkable tool that reads the biography written by a lifetime of meals and water. It is called stable isotope analysis, and it works like a geological and dietary fingerprint locked into the very substance of our skeletons. When we eat and drink, our bodies incorporate atoms from our environment, including subtle variations of elements like strontium, oxygen, carbon, and nitrogen. These variations, or isotopes, are not radioactive or dangerous. They are simply different weights of the same element. Their ratios in our bones and teeth become a permanent record of where we lived and what we consumed. A tooth forming in childhood captures the isotopic signature of the local bedrock and water where a person grew up. Bone, constantly remodeling throughout life, tells the story of an adult's diet and location. By carefully extracting tiny samples and measuring these isotopic ratios with immense precision, researchers can ask profoundly direct questions of the Paracas individuals. Were they local to that arid peninsula, or did they spend their formative years in a distant, geologically different valley? The strontium isotopes from the bedrock and the oxygen isotopes from rainfall patterns provide a map. If the isotopic signature in their teeth matches the local Paracas geology, they were born and raised there. If it is different, they were migrants, potentially bringing their distinct traditions or biology from somewhere else. This data can separate a homegrown elite from newcomers who may have arrived with new ideas and a different appearance. The carbon and nitrogen isotopes then paint a picture of their daily lives. Carbon isotopes can distinguish between diets based on different types of plants, like maize versus coastal grasses, or even between terrestrial and marine food sources. Nitrogen isotopes act as a trophic level indicator, essentially showing how high up the food chain an individual ate. A diet rich in seafood from the abundant Pacific would leave a very different nitrogen signature than one based on farmed crops and llama meat. Were these elongated individuals consuming the same food as everyone else, or did they have access to privileged resources, perhaps more protein from the ocean or from specially raised animals? This biogeochemical portrait can reveal social structure. If the isotopic data shows they enjoyed a distinct, richer diet compared to common burials, it reinforces their status as a privileged class. If it shows they shared the same local diet as others, it suggests their distinction was cultural or biological, not economic. Most intriguingly, if the data reveals a group of individuals who ate a consistently different diet and whose childhood isotopes point to a foreign homeland, it would powerfully support the idea of a distinct group integrating into Paracas society. This approach moves us from wondering about their origins to potentially tracing their life journeys with empirical clarity. The soil they walked on and the food they consumed are now witnesses, offering testimony that could either ground the mystery firmly in local sands or point compellingly toward distant horizons. A single skull can launch 1,000 theories, but it cannot define a people. This is the quiet, methodological challenge at the very core of the Paracas mystery. For all the intense focus on a few dozen extraordinary specimens, we must confront a simple but critical fact. The evidence we have is based on a vanishingly small sample. Giulio Tello's excavations revealed hundreds of burial bundles within that vast necropolis, a silent community resting together. Yet, only a tiny fraction of these individuals have ever been subjected to detailed anatomical study, let alone any form of genetic testing. This creates a fundamental question of perspective. Which skulls were chosen for close examination over the decades? In many cases, it was precisely the most dramatic, the most elongated, the most visually striking examples that drew researchers' attention. It is a natural human impulse to study the thing that stands out the most, but in doing so, we risk constructing an entire narrative based on what might be the statistical outliers, the most extreme 5% of the population. Imagine trying to understand the average height of all people in a city by only measuring the players on the professional basketball team. Your data would be spectacular, but it would tell you very little about the community as a whole. This sampling problem clouds every bold claim. Were the seamless sutures and massive cranial volumes the standard for the Paracas elite? Or were they rare medical anomalies that occurred within a broader group who also practiced head shaping? Without a systematic, random study of a large number of remains from across the burial site, we simply cannot know. A true population-level analysis would involve carefully examining a representative cross-section, perhaps 100 or more individuals selected without bias. Only then could researchers chart the full range of variation, from the subtly modified to the profoundly different, and see where the majority truly fall. The captivating skulls that dominate documentaries and books have framed the entire debate, but they may be the exception, not the rule. This does not make them any less fascinating, but it reminds us that a mystery built on a handful of bones is a story still missing most of its pages. To find the truth, we must be willing to look not just at the stars of the show, but at the entire supporting cast resting in the quiet dark. The vibrant threads of Paracas cloth hold a silent conversation across millennia. While the bones rest in their bundles, the culture's breathtaking textiles offer a different kind of testimony, a chance to see how these people chose to represent their own world. The embroidered figures that dance across these ancient fabrics are a riot of color and complex symbolism, depicting what scholars interpret as humans, powerful deities, and beings that blend the two. The critical question for our mystery is straightforward. If elongated heads were the mark of the revered, would their art show it? The answer is fascinatingly ambiguous. Some researchers point to certain embroidered figures, noting head shapes that appear deliberately extended, often topped with elaborate headdresses or streaming hair. They argue these are clear portraits of the elite, their most sacred physical trait immortalized in thread. Other experts caution against a literal reading. They suggest the artistic language of Paracas was deeply symbolic, where form followed meaning, not anatomy. An elongated shape in a textile might not represent a physical head at all, but could symbolize a ray of light, a mountain peak, a sprouting plant, or the flowing energy of a spiritual force. The human form in this art is often abstracted, compressed, and rearranged to tell a story about power, ancestry, or connection to the natural world. To look for a photographic likeness might be to miss the point entirely. This artistic ambiguity extends to the later Nazca culture, which inherited much from Paracas. Nazca pottery sometimes features painted figures with unmistakably elongated heads. Yet again, interpretation splits. Are these depictions of a remembered Paracas nobility, a continuing cultural ideal, or merely a stylistic convention that had lost its original biological anchor? A systematic study of all such imagery, comparing the art directly with the physical skulls, could be revealing. If the artistic elongation consistently matches the specific, sweeping curve of the Paracas bone, it strengthens the case for portraiture. If the artistic forms are wildly varied or purely geometric, it leans toward symbolism. This search in the artwork is not about finding a smoking gun, but about listening for an echo. It asks whether the culture's own handiwork reflects a society shaped by the visible presence of individuals who were physically distinct, or one united by a powerful idea that took visual form. The textiles do not give us DNA, but they might offer something equally precious, a glimpse into how the people of Paracas saw themselves, and whether the rulers they honored in death were painted in life as they truly were, or as they wished to be remembered. The relentless sun and the barren soil of the Paracas Peninsula were not just a backdrop, they were active participants in the story of every life lived there. Could the sheer, demanding nature of this place have left its mark not just on the culture, but on the very biology of the people? Evolutionary pressures are a sculptor of immense patience, shaping bodies over countless generations to better fit an environment. In the animal kingdom, we see this clearly: the thick fur of a mountain goat, the streamlined body of a dolphin. For humans, we know certain climates favored specific traits, like broader nasal passages in humid regions or slender body proportions in hot deserts to dissipate heat. But what about the shape of the skull? Could the challenges of a coastal desert have somehow influenced the cranial form we see in Paracas? Mainstream science finds no direct link between climate and the overall shape of the human brain case. Our skulls are not like animal skulls in that way. They are remarkably uniform in their basic blueprint across the globe, a testament to our shared species. Yet, when confronted with an anomaly as persistent as this one, some researchers allow for speculative, long-shot possibilities. One highly theoretical idea suggests that a larger cranial vault, with its increased surface area, might have offered some advantage in thermoregulation, helping to cool a brain working hard under a perpetual desert sun. Another considers the cognitive demands of survival in such a marginal environment, managing scarce water resources, navigating complex social networks for cooperation, and mastering the rhythms of both the barren land and the rich sea required immense knowledge and adaptability. Could a culture that placed supreme value on such intelligence have, over an immense span of time, indirectly favored lineages where cognitive capacity, and thus cranial size, was a heritable advantage? It is a fascinating thought experiment, but it remains squarely in the realm of the theoretical, a hypothesis nearly impossible to prove given the timescales involved. What this line of thinking does accomplish, however, is to remind us of a profound and beautiful complexity. Human variation is never a simple equation. It is a dynamic, interwoven tapestry of threads, each influencing the other. The genetic blueprint provides the potential, the environment presents the challenges and opportunities. And culture, that uniquely human force, decides how to interpret, value, and even shape the physical form that results. To isolate a single cause for the Paracas morphology, to declare it solely the product of binding, or solely a genetic fluke, or solely an environmental adaptation, is to oversimplify a deeply human story. Perhaps the true answer lies not in choosing one thread, but in understanding how they all became tangled together in this specific place, under that specific sun, to create individuals who are remembered not for being like everyone else, but for being distinctly, remarkably themselves. We are left with a tapestry of conflicting threads, each one pulling the story in a different direction. The anatomical data whispers of genuine biological difference, while the cultural evidence speaks of deliberate human choice. The genetic claims shout of revolution, but their proof remains locked away. So how do we weave these disparate strands into a coherent picture, one that honors the evidence without retreating into pure fantasy? The answer may not lie in choosing a single thread, but in understanding how they were all spun together on the same loom. The most balanced and perhaps most human synthesis is a hybrid model. It begins with an undeniable cultural fact. The Paracas people, like so many societies, practiced intentional cranial deformation. This was their chosen symbol, a visible mark of belonging to a powerful spiritual elite. It was a tradition passed from parent to child, a social sculpture molded onto the youngest members of their ruling class. But within that privileged group, over generations, something else may have been at work. Imagine a founding lineage, a family that held power. In the complex lottery of genetics, certain hereditary traits could have surfaced within this closed circle. A predisposition to craniosynostosis, the premature fusing of the skull's sutures, might have occurred with unusual frequency, or perhaps other subtle genetic factors influenced cranial growth, leading to a naturally more robust or elongated head shape. In a different society, such a trait might have been merely noted, but in Paracas, where a distinct head was already the cultural ideal, this biological tendency would have been a gift from the gods. It would have been seen not as a disorder, but as a divine confirmation. A child born into the elite who naturally exhibited the sacred form would be seen as doubly blessed, their body a perfect vessel for the community's spiritual aspirations. Over time, through both cultural practice and the subtle pressures of selection within a revered lineage, the biological and the symbolic became fused. The practice of binding would have accentuated and standardized a form that some were already biologically inclined toward, creating a feedback loop between culture and heredity. This model elegantly resolves the contradictions. It explains why the skulls show signs of cultural modification, yet also possess features that binding alone cannot create. It accounts for their revered status without needing to invoke otherworldly origins. The anomalies are not evidence of a lost species, but of a profound cultural amplification of rare human biology. The elite were not aliens, they were a people who looked into the faces of their children, saw a reflection of their deepest beliefs, and called it sacred. This synthesis asks us to hold two truths at once: that our ancestors were masters of their cultural world, shaping their bodies to reflect their ideals, and that they were also subject to the beautiful, random variations of human genetics, which they interpreted not as errors but as messages from the universe. Ultimately, this is not just a story about skulls. It is a story about us and how we understand our own journey. The quiet enigma of the Paracas remains forces a much larger question, one that echoes far beyond that Peruvian desert. Why does any of this matter? Because these silent individuals challenge the very frameworks we use to tell the human story. We build our histories on categories of normal and other, of typical and anomalous, constructing a neat, linear narrative of progress and migration. The Paracas skulls, with their stubborn refusal to fit neatly into any single box, remind us that our past is not a straight line but a sprawling, tangled web. It is a web woven from countless threads of migration, some known and many lost. It is shaped by long periods of isolation, where small groups adapted in unique ways to the demands of their world. And it is colored by the brilliant, unpredictable innovations of culture, the ways human communities choose to mark identity, honor the sacred, and make meaning from the raw material of biology. If future research ever conclusively proves a significant genetic component to their distinct form, the implication would be monumental. It would reveal a far greater and more beautiful diversity within ancient human populations in the Americas than our textbooks have traditionally allowed. It would show that the tapestry of our species is woven with threads of variation we are only beginning to recognize, threads that were not errors, but simply part of the rich, complex pattern of human life on this continent. Solving this particular puzzle, whether the answer leans toward profound cultural expression, rare biology, or a combination of both, would add a definitive new piece to the grand, unfinished jigsaw of human prehistory. Each piece changes the picture. It shifts borders, reconnects lost pathways, and introduces characters we did not know were part of the plot. The Paracas mystery, in all its complexity, stands as a powerful testament to one humbling truth. Our history is not a completed book sitting on a shelf. It is an ongoing excavation, a story still being written with every new discovery, reminding us that our past may yet hold profound and surprising secrets, waiting patiently in the silent earth for their turn to speak. The only way to move beyond this beautiful impasse is to forge a new path, one built on transparency, precision, and profound respect. We need a definitive research initiative, a collaborative project that treats the Paracas mystery with the seriousness it deserves while honoring the individuals at its heart. Such an undertaking would begin not in a laboratory but with a conversation. It requires gaining formal, documented permissions from both Peruvian cultural authorities and representatives of indigenous communities who see these remains as ancestors. This partnership is the essential first step, establishing a foundation of mutual trust and shared purpose. With clear ethical guidelines in place, the scientific work can begin with non-invasive clarity. A large, representative sample of the skulls, chosen without bias toward the most dramatic examples, would undergo high-resolution computed tomography scanning. This would create a definitive digital library of shapes, allowing for that crucial geometric morphometric analysis to finally map where these forms truly fall on the spectrum of human variation. The most anticipated step, the genetic analysis, must be conducted with an unprecedented level of rigor. Small samples would need to be collected under sterile, controlled conditions to minimize modern contamination. These samples would then be sent not to a single lab, but to multiple certified ancient DNA facilities around the world for independent replication. The protocols would be published in advance, and every piece of raw data, every genetic sequence, would be made publicly available for any expert to examine and verify. This radical transparency is the antidote to speculation. Finally, the entire process, from methods to results, must be submitted for publication in peer-reviewed scientific journals. This invites the global community to scrutinize, challenge, and ultimately validate or refute the findings. The commitment must be to follow the evidence wherever it leads, whether it confirms a unique genetic lineage, reveals a concentration of known medical conditions, or solidifies the cultural explanation. Only through this open, meticulous, and collaborative process can we hope to replace decades of mystery with durable knowledge. It is a path that gives both science and the ancestors their due respect, allowing the silent ones to finally have a clear and truthful voice in the story of our shared human past. Their story is a mirror held up to our own curiosity. The elongated skulls of Paracas stand as one of history's most tantalizing enigmas, a riddle written not in ink but in bone and genetics. We have walked with Giulio Tello across that salt-scoured peninsula, felt the weight of those silent bundles, and traced the intricate threads of their vibrant textiles. We have journeyed from the quiet tombs to the humming lights of modern labs, weighing the deliberate pressure of cultural practice against the stubborn facts of anatomy, and listening to extraordinary claims while demanding the rigorous proof of scientific skepticism. Each possible answer paints a different portrait of who these people were. Were they architects of their own appearance, molding the next generation to embody a sacred ideal? Were they caretakers of rare biology, interpreting the variance of the human form as a divine touch? Or do they whisper of a deeper, forgotten chapter in the sprawling book of humanity? Regardless of which theory resonates, their legacy is undeniable and powerful. These silent stone vessels compel us to keep questioning, to keep exploring the shadowed corners of our past with both open minds and critical eyes. They remind us that history is not a closed case, but an ongoing conversation between the present and the profound silence of those who came before. The final chapter of this story has yet to be written. It awaits the careful hand of future research, built on collaboration and respect. So we turn the question to you as fellow seekers in this grand mystery. What do you think these ancient skulls represent? Is there a piece of evidence or a perspective that has shaped your view? Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us continue this exploration together. If you are fascinated by history's greatest puzzles, consider subscribing for more journeys into the unknown. And always remember, when it comes to the depths of our shared human story, the truth is often waiting patiently to be found, and it is almost always stranger than any fiction we could invent.